everyone, welcome to Let's Talk. My name is John, and today here on the channel we're going to be talking about the 2011 horror film Insidious and its brand new Sony 4K Blu-ray that just came out. But before we dive into that, if you are a fan of 4K Blu-ray reviews, movie reviews, lists, and podcasts, we try to do them all here on the channel, and nothing helps this channel out more than by just simply liking this video and subscribing to the channel. So Insidious originally premiered at TIFF in September of 2010, then it went wide on April 1st, 2011. It was made for the very small shoestring budget of $1.5 million, and it eventually grossed over $100 million at the box office and started a very successful franchise that is still going to this day, with the 5th chapter, The Red Door, coming out in just a few weeks. But the original was directed by James Wan, it was written by Leigh Whannell, the same team that brought us films like Saw and Dead Silence, and James Wan wanted to prove to the studios that he could make a film that wasn't as brutal, down and dirty, and kind of disgusting from what a lot of people were saying, like the original Saw movie, and he wanted to prove that he can make just a regular studio horror film that didn't rely on gore and violence that much. And for me, he succeeded at that. Insidious is actually one of the better horror films to come out in the last 20 years. James Wan himself is a great horror director. He's one of our greatest horror directors in modern horror. He also produces a ton of horror films. He had Malignant come out a few years ago that a lot of people don't really remember, but it was such a great movie. I just think it got buried, it got released on HBO Max day and date, so it really didn't have a great box office run. But the 4K Blu-ray is fantastic if you guys haven't checked out that one. And he also started the Conjuring franchise, but James Wan doesn't like to finish his trilogies off. He directed the first 2 Insidious films, and he directed the first 2 Conjuring films before handing them off, although Leigh Whannell did direct the 3rd Insidious film. And Leigh Whannell himself, who appears in this film, he also appeared in Saw, ended up becoming a very successful director. He directed one of the best films in the last 10 years himself, and Upgrade. He also directed The Invisible Man from a few years ago that starred Elizabeth Moss. That was pretty successful. So there was so much talent behind this film, and then you bring in some great actors like Rose Byrne and Patrick Wilson, Barbara Hershey as Patrick Wilson's mother, and then in a star-making performance, Lin Shayne as Elise. She has been around since the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I remember her as the teacher in that movie. And then this actually made her into a star because she eventually ends up becoming really the face of this franchise. But she is perfect in this movie. And everybody really is. Even the child actors are all good in this movie. And it's just a scary, simple haunted house movie that kind of plays with the rules of haunted house movies. Early in this movie, it's believed that the son of Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne fell off a ladder, hit his head, and now that's why he's in a coma. But it turns out to be more than that. It turns out that his soul, his celestial body, is on a celestial plane now, on an astral plane, and he can't get back to his physical body. There's nothing wrong with him. It's just that his soul has drifted too far away because he's so innocent and naive as a kid. He trusts all of these demons and stuff, but these demons really want to take over his body so that they could live again. So really, the house isn't what's haunted. It's him that's haunted. So it's playing with these haunted house rules where we believe that the house is haunted. We got to get away from it. But what I like about this movie is that it's so well written that it plays with all the horror tropes and flips them upside down so that it leaves you on your toes. So you actually really don't know what's coming next. And this film is also pretty famous for one of the greatest jump scares in film history. I like to say that this and the jump scare from The Exorcist 3 are the two that really got me, made my heart just fall out of my chest, and pretty much killed me until I was brought back to life, because both of them just scared the absolute hell out of me. This one also has a really great score in it, very string heavy, very piano heavy, that builds up to some great jump scares. And it's funny because when I was watching the interviews for this, both Leigh Whannell and James Wan said that horror films became too reliant on jump scares and they don't pay off. It's those fake out jump scares, and they didn't want to go for that in this film. And for the most part, they really do. They really nailed the jump scares that they go for. Obviously, they had the most famous one in film history, and then a bunch of other ones in there that also are really good. And the score itself ends up really building to these moments so well. The score in general, anyway, just on its own, really does help to build that atmosphere, that tone, that fear that could just build up inside of you. Combine that with the lighting in this movie. It's very cool lit. The color temperature of this movie is very cool. Everything looks very white and very clean. They kind of light the scenes with just one light or maybe 2 lights, and the lights are overwhelming the rest of the room, but everything around it is dark, just really selling you on the fear of this movie. It does such a good job at that. And actually, the guy who does the score for this movie actually is the demon in this movie, so that's pretty cool. He's got 2 roles. I guess you got to do that when you have a $1.5 million budget, because they also shot it in only 3 weeks. Patrick Wilson said that they didn't have enough time or money to get a lot of coverage, and luckily, somehow, this movie has become a great classic horror film, one that has started a franchise that's still successful, very successful, and that just shows you that money doesn't make a difference. It really is the people behind it. Like, for $1.5 million in comparison to a movie like Fast X that cost $340 million, there aren't many sets in this movie, but everything, all the money just goes to perfect use. Everything in the film just looks great. It's not a perfect film, obviously. It does suffer from, kind of like what generic horror films would suffer from sometimes, where like it's kind of paced a little bit slowly in the first act to help us develop the characters. So like the structure of the film you've seen in a lot of other horror films. It's not really breaking new ground there, but what it does break new ground in is, I think, flipping on some of those tropes and then leading to what I think is a fantastic third act and a great ending that sets up the sequel, which is actually pretty much just as good as the original Insidious movie. So I really do think that for a movie that kind of ends on that horror cliffhanger that we've seen a bunch of movies end on, I actually think this is one of the better ones to do that, where it doesn't feel like you didn't get a conclusion, and it does actually help you to anticipate the sequel, Insidious Chapter 2. So overall, it's a pretty good film that I really think you should check out if you haven't seen it. But we're also here today to talk about its brand new 4K that just came out from Sony. Well, here it is. This is the new Sony 4K Blu-ray Steelbook. This is the only way you can get it right now on 4K is in this Steelbook. So if you guys look at the packaging before we dive into the disc itself, it's pretty nice. This Steelbook isn't the best one I've ever seen. It's actually very dark looking all around. So it's also a fingerprint magnet, more than I've seen in a while. So anytime you touch it, it's going to be very noticeable on the case. You pop it open, you get a 4K and the previous 2011 Blu-ray in there, which I thought was pretty funny. It's got a trailer for Breaking Bad Season 3 on there, so if you were wondering if Season 3 of Breaking Bad looks good, you can check it out on this Blu-ray. Really nice design on the inside. It's those pictures that were on Patrick Wilson's son Wall, the one who actually ends up getting possessed in this movie, so I thought that was pretty cool that they did that. These Steelbooks, if they play into the movie for the fans of the movie, and most of the time, a person who's a fan of the movie is the person doing the buying of a steelbook like this, because it's for the collectors. So how is this 4K disc? Well, you get the works, you get Dolby Vision, you get Dolby Atmos, you get HDR10 on here, so you get everything you could have wanted. It's a big upgrade audio-wise from the Blu-ray. Now, visually, it's not the biggest upgrade, and I think that's mostly just because of source material, because the Blu-ray itself is pretty good. It only came out in 2011. Yes, that's 12 years, but it's shot on, modern digital cameras. The scenes themselves are very well lit. They're very uniquely lit. The color temperature of this movie is very cool, so there's almost no yellow. It's very white looking, and then they light these scenes with usually individual lights, from a lantern, one lamp on a table in a room, and that might overwhelm the lighting of the scene. And again, it's just so very cool looking, so you're really taking a lot of the color out of this movie, and this 4K still illustrates that to you perfectly. It does do it a little bit better than that previous Blu-ray, which does look good because the previous Blu-ray is hitting those deep blacks and the vibrant colors, just not as well as the 4K. I think that's what the HDR and the Dolby Vision are doing the most work, is really making the contrast between the colors look better, and combine that with now the higher resolution, so now the 4K looks sharper. It's just you're not going to see the biggest jump from that previous Blu-ray. So if you have that previous Blu-ray that's actually packed in here, you might be a little bit disappointed with the quality jump, because the quality of that previous Blu-ray is still pretty good. You really get those big quality jumps when you look back on older films, 70s and 80s films, or even back in 50s and 60s films. When they come to 4K, usually those might see the biggest quality jump because they're source material. So now we're cleaning up that old source material, bringing it to 4K, modernizing the film essentially, whereas this is already a modern film with a really good Blu-ray disc, so it's already in high definition, so going to 4K from that, it's just not going to be the biggest noticeable jump, but it's still a really high quality, well-made 4K from Sony. Visually, I have no complaints about it. It's still a 10 visually because it just looks that good. It's going from an 8.5 to a 10 now, where, an old film might go from a 5 to a 10. So it's a really not that big of a noticeable jump, but it's still a noticeable jump. Now, audio-wise, getting that Dolby Atmos track is great. It's not the best Dolby Atmos track that I've ever heard. I actually expected a little bit more for it. I think my expectations were a little high because the score for this film is fantastic, and it's building to those jump scares. So I just expected the volume to jump a little bit more in these types of jump scares. more than it did. I just didn't think it was like the biggest jump as far as that goes. And I expected a little bit more bass on the Dolby Atmos track. It still makes good use of pretty much all of your speakers, and the dialogue is crisp and clear. You don't have to worry about how everyone sounds. Everyone sounds clear no matter when they're speaking. You can set the volume at whatever you want to set it at and not have to think about it for the rest of the movie. But I was just a little bit disappointed by it. I just expected a little bit more, but I think that was my expectations. I always feel like horror films lend themselves best to new audio mixes, because especially more modern horror films, I feel like those are the people that go in, the people doing the sound design on those films. They do put a lot more effort using those speakers, because they're trying to get stuff coming from behind you, to the left of you. You know, really, action and horror make the best Atmos tracks, whereas like a drama film, I like having it, but it's not 100% necessary in those types of films. Really, that's when you want the dialogue to be crisp and clear, but action and horror films, you know, you want everything around you to sound just as good as the dialogue. So that's what I look for in an Atmos track. Whereas this, it doesn't blow me away, but it's still really good. Now, extras wise, you get nothing on the 4K disc unless you want the trailer. And on the Blu-ray disc, obviously, it's all previously released extras, but they're all really good. They're separated into like 15-minute little featurettes that you could have edited into one long documentary, which is what I would have appreciated, but no problem with that. I'm just really glad we got all these interviews with Leigh Whannell and James Wan. We get to see all this behind-the-scenes stuff on the set, how James Wan really likes to have fun on the set, which is good because you're making a horror film, especially with kids. You know, you want to make sure everyone's having a good time, and you really kind of appreciate James Wan and Leigh Whannell. They seem like really cool, down-to-earth guys who just like making movies, and they don't seem to be taking themselves too seriously. They know what they want to do. Like, they're very serious with their work, but they do seem like regular fun people that you could have a conversation with. And it's always cool to see James Wan working with Patrick Wilson, because they obviously have quite the repertoire together between this, and then eventually you would get Patrick Wilson in Aquaman. So seeing all that behind the scenes stuff is really fun. That's the stuff I love, and that's why I kind of always complain when discs don't have a lot of extras on it, because I love to see how movies are made, and I love to really get to know the filmmakers themselves, the actors. I like to, like, you know, humanize these people and see what they are as humans. I like to see if they're genuinely good people, and seeing how James Wan and Leigh Whannell are, based on just these interviews, they seem like just really nice, genuine people. Those are the kind of people I root for, the ones giving it their all, and they just seem to appreciate everybody on face value. So I did appreciate the extras on here, even if they weren't new. So overall, what would I give this 4K Blu-ray on a score of 1 to 10? I would give this a really solid 8 out of 10. It's not the greatest 4K I've ever seen. You know, it's not the biggest quality jump from that previous Blu-ray, but the packaging is good. It's good for the collector. You know, you get everything that's on the previous Blu-ray, including all those extras. The 4K jump is still a noticeable jump, and if you're a fan of Insidious, you're going to definitely be happy with that quality jump, because if you want it in its definitive edition, this is going to be it. Now, again, you can only get it in the Steelbook now. Us collectors have been around the block. We can probably expect like a slipcover version of this in the fall or at the beginning of next year, because that's usually how these things go, which I don't really appreciate that. I think you release them both at the same time, but I get it. These are businesses. It's Sony, you know, they need their money, so I understand how that stuff works. But, you know, a little bit disappointing for people spending their money. It would have been nice to give them the option. But anyway, guys, I could definitely recommend it. So if you want to actually grab this through our Amazon affiliate link, I will leave that in the description below. It costs no extra money for you, and it does really help this channel out. And another thing that really helps this channel out is just by simply scrolling down, hitting that like icon, hitting that subscribe button, maybe turn notifications on if you'd like. Subscribe to us on all podcast services. We release 2 podcasts a week on there. So we try and just cover all our grounds here on the channel. And if you want to keep following along on the journey, make sure you subscribe to us. And then after you're done doing all of that, I just want you guys to go out, maybe find your own haunted house, and tell all the ghosts and friends there about us. And we'll be seeing you around.